So before we launch our Green Deal panel and really discussing how technologies can support less CO2 emission, but also basically the green technology and the circular economy, I would like to introduce the next speaker, which is Minister Svenja Schulze, Federal Minister for Environment, Nature Conservation and Nuclear Safety from Germany. She became the minister in 2018, and before taking office, she serves as the Minister of Innovation, Science and Research in the Western German state of North Rhine-Westphalia. So welcome, Minister Schulze. It's an honor to have you here today.
Thanks a lot, Cecilia Bonnefeldal. Best regards to Hillary Mine. Ladies and gentlemen, you discussed it, but I want to say it again. Smartphones, artificial intelligence, social media, algorithms, digital innovations are changing our life with breathtaking speed. The climate crisis is changing our lives just as drastically. And both trends are closely interlinked. And it is my goal to shape the digital transformation so that it improves our quality of life and serves the public good. And this also means that it must contribute to reaching our climate goals, because it are climate goals for all of us. So how can we achieve this? And there are three crucial components here. The first one is private individuals in making more conscious consumer choices. The second is policymakers establishing guardrails, creating incentives and supporting transition. And the third is and digital corporation living up their responsibilities. Major investments, you all know, major investment decisions are going to be made in the next few years, and many sectors and many industries are undergoing structural change. New market and power structures are emerging, but this phase of transformation that holds also the opportunity to establish sustainable development as a guiding principle. To a limit extent, each and every one of us can help reduce the ecological footprint of digitalization. For example, if consumers stop buying every trendy smartphone and tablet, I know that is very hard. If consumers dispose of these devices properly, or if consumers stream lower resolutions on small screens and, where possible, use fiber optic connections instead of mobile data. Consumers can also do their part by making use of digital innovations like sharing services. In individuals' ability to connect digitalization and climate action is extremely limited. I see here an enormous need for innovative policy making. In general, it is time to put policy guardrails in place. For this reason, my goal is to make innovations a tool for environment protection and climate action, and also ensure that environmental protection and climate action play a major role in the regulation of digital technologies. I detailed this mission in the Digital Policy Agenda for the Environment, which contains 70 specific measures to Germany. And in addition, I made digitalization and the environment a focus of the German Council presidency, all in little less than 1 year. That's really new and hard work. I want to highlight just 3 of the achievements. Firstly, smartphone, tablets, and other digital devices should have longer lifespans and be easier to repair. To this end, we decided to make more stringent demands on devices manufacturers by adapting an eco-design directive. And secondly, data centers EU-wide are to be climate neutral by 2030. The European Commission is taking the necessary steps. And thirdly, data is the foundation for fact-based policy making for research and innovation. A European data space for the European Green Deal will be established in the future in order to promote exchange of data relevant to environmental protection and climate action. The German government is also moving forward on data access and use with a national data strategy, and we can start up through European single market for data with teamwork between the European and the national level. All three of these success stories incentivize digital innovation, but it's not just about regulation. My ministry is also a supporter and enabler. Take, for example, our funding program for artificial intelligence or our digital innovation hub. In addition to policy, multinationals like Google have considerable responsibility because of their dominant roles in the market. And some of these companies have set their own climate target, which I commend them for. Unlike other industries like steel, like farming and aviation, digital services are relatively easy to decarbonize simply by switching to green electricity. And this is why society and policymakers are keeping a close eye on how companies are achieving their targets. It is by reducing energy consumption in the company, or by offsetting, by switching to renewable energies or to nuclear power. It is not enough to set ambitious targets in either in policies or in companies. Whether a company takes these targets seriously can be seen in its day-to-day operations, and companies can do a great deal to contribute to climate action. Part of this is transparency for users. I believe digital companies should show their ecological footprint of making a search query or using cloud or streaming services. Another part is making the relevant data available. This year, there's a research project starting up in Germany that is a voluntary registry for data centers. If centers join the registry, anyone can compare their energy consumption with the energy consumption of other data centers, and I think that is really important. Companies can also use existing labels. In Germany, for instance, we have the Blue Angel for particularly energy efficient data centers. And finally, search platforms should enable their users to perform targeted searches for sustainable products. The Technical University of Berlin is working with the search engine Ecosia to develop an exciting tool. It will display real-time information on manufacturing conditions and energy consumption. Tech companies' responsibility is not limited in their own infrastructure. It also extends to how companies influence individuals' behavior. Digital companies must take responsibility for the content distributed on their platforms, and user-based algorithms should not lure people into filter bubbles full of disinformation. This development is a major risk that is not just affecting the fight against climate change. So, ladies and gentlemen, you hear that yesterday, but I want to point it out again. This decade will be decisive for the development of the digital transformation. In recent years, different paths of digitalization have emerged. On the one hand, we have unchecked consumption-driven US-style digital capitalism, where lots of data is in the hand of a small number of large corporations. And on the other hand, we have inflexible government digitalization together with a digital surveillance system like the one in China. We want to find out our own path as Europeans, a path that relies on data privacy and reconciliation of interest, a path guided by benefits for people and nature. And the European Green Deal and the General Data Protect regulations are good first steps. I think Charles Michel is absolutely right. Let's make Europe to the digital powerhouse of the world. The current political developments make it clear to us how important it is to think critically about the business models and operation of platforms and social media and their principles. Projects like the Digital Service Act, the Digital Market Act, and the Digital Governance Act are major landmarks for shaping the digital economy. I think their importance cannot be overstated. I think that the goal of sustainability must guide the regulation of large tech companies. Sustainable digitalization can become a European trademark, and the EU can and should be a leader here. I call on all of you to take the joint approach to win the challenges of digital transformation and environmental protection. We can master them both at the same time if we work together. And I thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Minister Schulze. Great speech. Just also letting you know, in particular, that Digital Europe has been working on sustainability for decades. Yes. And we are working on both the product side, but also the more proactive side on CO2 emissions, data centers. And we've just shaped a new group under the sustainability group called Green Deal Working Group. And just looking a little bit ahead now with all the recovery funds. I mean, do you see Germany also taking kind of a lead position in digital investment in green, and will that play a major role also in your investment plans?
Yes, I think that is new in this decade. We see decades before, when we have problems, climate action was taken on the back burner, to be quite frank here. But now, the digital transformation and the climate action are still a part of that, what we are doing. In our recovery program, the everything that counts for climate action, that is nearly the half of the whole budget. So I think that is really an historic moment where climate action become really, really important, not only for the ministers who are responsible, but also for finance, for transport, for all the ones who emit CO2. And in Germany, I'm very happy that we have a finance minister that is aware of what has to be invested in the future and give the money to do so.
We will also receive you on the panel. You will be on this great expert panel on exactly the Green Deal and the transformation of industry and of society into a greener economy, and of course facilitated by digital technologies. Is there any advice that you would like to give, maybe to the businesses, to the industry? I mean, is there something that we can do more of? Are we collaborative enough? Should we do things different and to tap more into the political agenda?
Just one hint, because we have to be faster. There are ways to connect digital innovations and the environmental protection, but it is relatively slow when I see what digital innovations bring up in the last years. So being faster, doing more to connect digital innovations and environmental protection, and to use digital innovations to protect the environment. I think we have the potential to do more, and we have to be faster than we are today.
Great. We will speed up the transition and recovery of a digital and more green Europe. Thank you so much to Minister Schulze for a great speech. And I will now hand over to Svenja van der Rensen to introduce the panel. Thank you so much, Minister.
Hello and good morning, everyone. Good morning, Minister. I'm looking forward to you joining our panel in just a moment. My name is Svenja van Rensen. I'm a journalist based in Brussels. I'm the managing editor for a new website called Energy Monitor, which is dedicated to the energy transition, not just in Europe, but worldwide, which was launched by the New Statesman Group last autumn. And this is, I think, digitalization and the energy transition, climate action, environmental protection is indeed one of the big topics, certainly also on our editorial agenda. As the Minister just said, the next decade will be decisive for the twin transitions of digitalization, of climate, and I would say more broadly, environmental protection. One of the key questions is well, I think the three topics we will touch on in the panel are: one, what concrete opportunities are there? What is the untapped potential? I think we just heard some real examples already from you, Ms. Schulze. Secondly, what are the barriers to realizing those? What are the opportunities? What is the business case? What will make companies, as you said, speed up innovation linked also specifically to environmental protection? And finally, we will focus, I think, on specifically the investment framework. Here in Europe, we have an unprecedented opportunity, well, sadly brought about by the pandemic, but unprecedented amounts of public funding that can be used to ultimately build back better. I'd like to welcome the rest of our panel. So there are 5 of them. So in addition to Ms. Schulze, we have Kasper Klinge, Vice President for European Government Affairs at Microsoft, Mauro Petriccione, Director General for Climate Action at the European Commission. We will have Sandrine Dixon de Clèves, co-president of the Club of Rome. She's running a few minutes late, so she's in another event, so she will join us as soon as she is able. And finally, John Linden, CEO of Econo, a serial entrepreneur and someone who's going to excite us with the very latest in digital innovation. So the idea is we've got, let me see, a bit more than an hour to fill. So we've got a great panel. Hello, Sandrine. Nice to see you too. And but we'd like to take some of your questions, your input to this discussion as we get going. So you can send in questions via the chat function, and they'll be relayed to me and to our panel, and we'll try and incorporate as many of those as we can. What we thought we would do to kick off, however, is put a polling question to everyone attending this morning. We have a few of these prepared, but we'll do them one by one. So don't worry, you're not going to be overwhelmed. And I'd like to put the first question to our participants, which is: in which sector do you see the biggest enabling potential of digital technologies? And I believe you can choose just one option. And I hope you can all see the question. But basically, the options will be agriculture, buildings and construction, energy, manufacturing, transport, or something else. And to give you all a few minutes to do that, what I propose is that we'll kick off our panel, and we'll come back to those results in just a couple of minutes after we've heard from 1 or 2 panelists. So I would like to give the floor, first of all, to Kasper Klinge, who, as I said, is joining us from Microsoft. He's on the senior leadership team there for corporate, external, and legal affairs. And what I saw and struck me was I read Denmark's and the world's first ambassador to the global tech industry prior to this. And before that, had a longest distinguished career as a diplomat all around the world. So in your capacity today, I think the first question from me would be, we had a few concrete examples already from the minister, what she believes the tech industry can do. What do you see as the real untapped potential for digitalization to tackle climate action specifically?
Yeah, no, thanks. First of all, thanks very much, Sonja, for inviting me to join the panel. And I listened very carefully to Minister Schulze and her presentation. And in many ways, I don't think I have a lot to add, because I think she covered the promise of where we are right now, despite being in the middle of a very challenging global pandemic. I think what is good about where Europe is right now is that this old contradiction between sustainability on one side and digitalization on the other side, that has been removed, I think, both in our minds, but also in practice. And I give, full credit to the European Union for driving this, not only in Europe, but I think, this so-called Brussels effect where Europe has a global reach. What happens in Europe will be copy-pasted in many other places. I think that's what we are seeing in practice around this. If I zoom a little bit in on some of the areas that we are involved in Microsoft, I think the first point is, of course, that the digital transition holds enormous potential for actually driving the sustainability agenda. And the minister alluded to a couple of areas. And if we take one of them, data centers, where we, of course, one of the big players, cloud transition. Very often we hear, and I hear it all the time from European decision makers, that they are very energy demanding. There is a problem of us loading so much data into the cloud. But in fact, when we drill down and look at energy efficiency, the cloud is a much more efficient way of handling data and enabling innovation and enabling digitalization. We know from our own systems that it's somewhere between 30 and even 93% more efficient than having a set of servers in your basement. And I actually wanted just to use one example from my home country of Denmark, and a company called SimCorp that went from having more than 300 servers to adopting a cloud strategy. And that actually meant that this horrible word of power usage effectiveness factor went from 1.6 to 1.1, and that actually meant a reduction of CO2 emissions by almost 45%. So I think we need to embrace the fact that going to the cloud is not only good for innovation, it's not only good for enabling companies also to do well during difficult times of a global pandemic, but it's also good for the environment. And I think the second thing I just wanted to sort of highlight in this area is going to the cloud also opens the opportunities for using state-of-the-art technology. Mm-hmm. And we might come back to that later in the panel debate. But I would just advocate for the fact that I think whether you're a small or medium-sized enterprise, whether you're a very big, large European corporation, you need access to the latest technology also to help you drive your sustainability strategy, your sustainability agenda. And I think that untapping that potential is very much also about what the digital strategy of individual companies is about, and of course where we think we can deliver a critical infrastructure that will actually both be green and also help us transition towards a much more greener future.
Okay, thank you. Very specifically on data centers, do you believe it's possible for all data centers here in Europe to be climate neutral by 2030?
No, absolutely. I mean, in Microsoft, we've made it our own target that by 2025, every single data center is going to run 100% on renewable energy. What I would say, Svenja, is I'm a bit of an aviation nerd, and you can hold it against me later on. But I think when you look at space travel, or I would even say when you look at Formula One, where of course there is a lot of criticism about this being fossil fuel driven today. But I think both in terms of space travel, space agencies, and Formula One, what has been quite interesting is that they have also helped with the efficiency. I mean, one of the reasons why we have engines today that are much more efficient than the past is because you had these high-powered activities that actually had spin-off effects for the rest of the society. And I, in many ways, look at our data centers in a similar way, because they bring the latest innovations, both in terms of computing capabilities, but in fact also in terms of energy efficiency and sustainability, use of water, use of renewable energy. So I think on top of doing what is right ourselves, our hope is that what we do with our data centers will have a spin-off effect in terms of innovation that can be used by many other industries and many other sectors. So hopefully it's sort of a project where we can gear innovation across Europe and indeed across the world.
Okay, just one more question, and then we'll come back to some of the other points later. But one of the figures we often hear is that the I guess digital technologies could deliver a 20% reduction in global CO2 emissions. And I just wondered, is it possible to tell us something about how that would be fleshed out? So where is the greatest potential? Is it around data centers? Is it somewhere else? Where does that 20% come from? Can you see anything where the biggest potential is?
Well, I couldn't answer the poll before because we're sitting in the studio, of course, but I would actually answer all of the above. And I think that's sort of the fundamental aspects of digitalization, that it is not just one sector, one area that could potentially benefit. It's across the board. And again, I just want to point out to the very challenging year we've been through during COVID-19, the fact that we have onboarded so many people on digital tools, and actually also just pointing out that not going digital is not an option today. We've seen that companies who have not digitalized, who haven't been using the latest platforms, have generally been struggling a lot more during the global pandemic. So I think the point is, you mentioned a 20% target. I would probably raise that number. I think we can be much more ambitious. And again, building on what we've seen in the last year, building on some of our own commitments, I think we can help deliver a much greener future. And again, I don't want to take too much time, but I certainly also want to give credit to what the European Union is doing. And I think the Green Deal is a very decisive moment for Europe. It creates a lot of accountability, and a ton of regulations is coming in our direction. I'm sure Mauro will speak a lot more about that in a second, but we welcome that, and we do think that if we want to be serious about mitigating climate change and driving our societies in a more sustainable direction, we need to self-regulate, we need to innovate, but we also need to be held accountable by international organizations like the European Union.
Okay, thank you very much. I know there's I'll come back to you on the Microsoft commitment to go carbon negative. I think we'll leave that for the debate. That's the next stage, of course. We have the results to the poll in the meantime, so I'll share those with you. The number one category was manufacturing. So almost a third of people, 32%, said manufacturing is where they see the greatest potential. That was followed by energy, 18%, so almost 1 in 5. Buildings and construction, transport and agriculture, so 12, 13, 14, 15%. So manufacturing, clearly where people see the greatest potential. And panelists obviously feel free to comment on that, whether you would have voted likewise or differently, as and when I give you the floor. Let's turn back then to the Minister, Ms. Schulze. So you've already elaborated in your speech on what I guess some of the initiatives that you initiated under the German presidency. I guess based also on what you've just heard, and Mauro is going to tell us something give us a flavor of the many initiatives that are set to come. What for you is most important at the moment to move forward on? So we have some commitments already. We have some ideas for what maybe should happen. We have great differences at national level. What do you think, we have the whole funding side, what do you think can do most at this stage to really bring about an acceleration and a delivery on both the green front and the digitalization front?
Yeah, thanks a lot for the question. When we started the discussion on the European level with the environment ministers from all the member states, that was the first time that environment ministers discussed about digitalization, and that in the year 2020. It was unbelievable for me that it's started before. So that was the first time. And I think it is really important to systematically link the target of the environment and digitalization. And that's what's going on with the European Green Deal, with the digitalization strategy, with all the things we have in environment and digitalization now, and that's the strategy we bring on the way in the last year, and this systematically looking what we can do. I think that is really important, because digitalization is very, very fast, and no one believes what is possible, how energy intensive digitalization is. And now we see it. Bringing it in the right way, having the right guide rails, I think that is really important. And therefore, the European level is really decisive.
Okay, thank you. And what would you say you see as the greatest challenge to doing that at the moment? So we hear, obviously, there's regulation that can be made. There's financial support that can be provided. We sometimes hear worries about a rebound effect. So is consumption actually going to go up the more efficient we become? There's inertia in the current system. What else? We hear about the environmental footprint of the industry itself. Is there, amongst all these many options, and maybe you have more, what do you think we need to be cautious about as we enthusiastically embrace all the potential of digital out there?
I think we have to do all of that. That's not one thing that drives us forward, but we have to speed up and do all the things, financing it, discussing it, bringing the right framework at the same time. And I know that is a challenge, okay, but it is a challenge we have to take.
Okay. And one last question I think of, as you say, these synergies are really important. So when it comes to the recovery funding, so the recovery and resilience package, so a fifth of that is supposed to be dedicated to digitalization. At the same time, we also have a pot of money, I think it's 30% dedicated to climate action. How do we ensure that there is overlap between those two? And is that, well, for example, in Germany, is that happening, that there is substantial overlap between those two different pots?
Yes, there is an overlap between both with environmental protection and digitalization, because we can use digital innovations to protect the environment, to bring us forward in reducing CO2. See, the transport sector, it is not enough to have e-mobility. We need to organize transport in a more efficient, in a more intelligent way. And therefore, artificial intelligence can also help very, very much to reduce CO2. And this co-benefits, this twin we have there. I think that is very important, and we need to bring both parts, digitalization and environment, forward.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, that's a very good example. So in mobility, indeed, you can change the mode, the engine, and at the same time, but you have a whole logistical component too, which is something that digital can clearly help with. Okay, thank you. Mauro Petticcione, so here from the European Commission, Director General for Climate Action, position he's been in for almost 3 years now. And prior to that, was Deputy Director General for Trade, and indeed had a long career working on trade, all aspects of trade within the European Commission. So I think we're all curious to hear what you can tell us about what the Commission's plans are going forward. And I think specifically the policy initiatives, legislative, but also otherwise, that will really promote the synergy between the digital economy on the one hand and climate action on the other. Go ahead.
Thank you, Sonja. Very good to be here, and thank you for this invitation. You put me in a difficult spot, because add something useful after Svenja, as I've experienced for the past 6 months, is very difficult, because she has given us a pretty complete view of things. But let me try to. I'll probably say many of the same things, but let me see whether I can say them in a usefully different manner. We're going to present a huge package of legislation in June. But my advice would be not to focus exclusively on the legislation. The legislation in itself is part of a huge package of initiatives. If you just look at what we're trying to do on energy, we're not just going to increase our targets for energy efficiency and for renewables, but we're going to put them in context. We have published a strategy on hydrogen, a strategy on energy system integration, a strategy on methane. We have published a strategy on the Renovation Wave, which is going to be one of the key plans for getting to our energy efficiency targets. I think one of the biggest challenges that we have now is to understand the depth of what we are doing. We talk about mitigating climate change, but we make the mistake of translating that into mitigating emissions. If you want to mitigate climate change, you have to eliminate emissions. We're moving to a situation where reducing emission, doing your best, just isn't good enough. Everybody has to have a plan, whatever their plan is, whatever their size, whatever their role, to fit into a world plan to eliminate most emissions as soon as possible after 2050. For that, Europe is trying to contribute by setting 2050 as its own target and try to create a model that shows how you can do it without screwing up the economy. And without being unfair, without leaving people behind, and maintaining a society which is lively and prosperous. What is fascinating is how many countries all of a sudden not only are interested in watching, but are joining the bandwagon. Only last autumn you had Japan, China, Canada, Korea, South Africa, and we're all waiting to see the official pronouncement of President Biden. So But to do that, we have to understand that everything really hangs together, and it's going to be very hard for everybody to keep track of how these things hang together. Practical examples. We talked about energy efficiency in your poll. I would have answered like Casper. I would have said everything. And it's not just how much you reduce emissions, but how crucial you are. Take agriculture. Extremely difficult to reduce non-CO2 emissions. But how are you going to do it if you don't use land in the most effective manner? And we don't, because we need a lot of bureaucratic controls on how we use the land to avoid the laws are violated. Now you can do that at the click of a button on your computer using satellite technology. It's a completely different, and then how do you interpret this data? How do you understand them? So the digitalization in all its aspects has a huge role to play, even in areas which traditionally were looked at as extremely hard to decarbonize. And the renovation wave isn't going to happen without domotics. We're no longer talking about brick and mortar here. We're talking about what is going to become a very high-tech industry. High-tech materials, skilled engineers, domotics all over the houses to figure out what's the energy consumption, how to reduce it, how to manage on a minute-by-minute basis. But the other difficulty of hanging things together is things which are beyond Green Deal and digitalization. Caspar gave an example, the cloud. Well, how are we going to use the cloud if we risk a rejection by people because they don't feel their data are secure in the cloud? That's the point that Svenja made earlier when she was talking about the data protection. How are we going to convince people to use domotics if they feel that somebody else can hack the house and do something funny with it? So there you have such a broad view, and we've been talking about this forever. We've never actually done it, but we're betting the house on our ability to keep all policies together in a coherent manner. And to be honest, our record so far, collectively as governments and businesses and people, is, let's say, mixed in this respect. Yeah. So we have to step up.
Okay. Thank you for that. Yes, I realize it's an enormous challenge, and just keeping tabs on all of these different fields and how they might fit together is never mind metrics to measure progress is an enormous challenge in itself. I guess based on what you said, how you would have answered the poll, asking you what kinds of digital projects you think would make the biggest impact. You're going to tell me we need everything.
We need everything, and we need more.
Yeah,
yeah. and there are no limits. Casper was talking about Formula One. There are people electrifying Formula One, and they plan to have those cars racing in 2024. So maybe a better question is, what are your expectations for the digital industry, for digital companies specifically? I mean, we've heard from Casper. There's a lot. We're going to hear from John in a moment. There's a lot of exciting things happening. We also heard from Svenja Schulze that she believes, the kinds of the rapid innovation we see, perhaps we could be even more rapid when it comes to innovations that benefit the environment. So can you tell us something around what you expect from the digital industry? And I'm thinking here too, on the one hand, there's very concrete projects which save energy, switching to renewables. On the other hand, there's also, of course, the much bigger impact, and again, the minister touched on it, that these platforms have in terms of their function in conveying information. They fill a much bigger shoes than simply being infrastructure, cloud, etc. providers. So maybe some thoughts on that. Well, I'm going to say three things. I mean, one is technology, new solutions. We have no doubt that they're coming. So my only recommendation to the industry is keep your eyes open. The Green Deal, what we are doing, will open unforeseen possibilities for digitalization and for streamlining and doing things in a faster, more efficient manner. So keep your eyes open. That's not a worry, because that is an industry who is good at keeping their eyes open. But still, do that. Secondly, as I said earlier, make us feel safe. We can't afford to go that way and risk a rejection by people. And rejections aren't rational. Just look at the question of vaccines. I mean, I grew up at the time when vaccinating the world was the world's task. We were eliminating diseases. Now, when I hear how many people don't want to be vaccinated against this virus, I'm flabbergasted. That tells you that people's fears, by definition, aren't rational, but they're real. And we all know how nervous a lot of people are about the digital industry and its impact. So my recommendation is, please make sure that we feel safe in using your product, your solution, your software. I think the industry has a bigger role to play than it has so far. And the third thing is, there will be resources, there will be solutions, but let's not believe in miracles. It is true that digitalizing can save a lot more emissions than the growth of the industry will produce. But again, in the logic of eliminating emissions, and where we will have relatively little ability to compensate emission, even that industry cannot go on with its pattern of consumption. And it's not good enough to say it's going to be renewable energy, because there will be hard competition for that renewable energy from all sorts of sources. So it's perhaps less urgent than in areas like heavy industry, but you don't do these things overnight. And an industry which is growing now has a better chance of organizing its growth in a energy efficient manner than an industry which is 2 centuries old and needs to be renovated from scratch. So keep in mind, it's not today's worry, but it will be tomorrow or next week's worry how much that industry consumes energy, even if it's green, because we're not going to have green energy for all the waste that we have today. We're going to reduce our consumption by 50% between now and 2050.
Yeah. Thank you. That's very clear, I think. Let's move then to Sandrine Dixon-de Clèves, so co-president of the Club of Rome, and thank you very much for joining us today. For those of you who don't yet know her, I guess most people may have crossed your path at some point. Sandrine has more than 30 years experience, I would say, to sum up in the sustainability space. So working with everything from governments, thought leaders, so in the government, public sector, business leaders, academics. She sits on many different boards and advisory bodies. So for everything from European institutions, national governments, and so forth. And I would say she's really someone who's at the heart of the transformation, both transformations that we're speaking about today. So Sandrine, I think you're kind of the outside person, at the same time you're at the center of all this. So it would be good to hear what you make of the contributions we've had so far. The Club of Rome, of course, has been hard at work as well, producing various reports and papers looking at how we can build back better, how can we really deliver a green recovery. One policy brief was on the integrating or using 21st century well-being economics in the EU recovery. Maybe you want to draw on that. And I know that you've done this kind of work more at global level as well, notably through the planetary emergency plan. So maybe some thoughts from you also based on what we've heard. How can we accelerate these two, the digital and the environmental climate transitions? And specifically, what needs to happen at policy level? And then we can focus on Europe, I think. Otherwise, it's going to be very big. Go ahead.
Thanks so much, Sonja, for that introduction. And it's always a pleasure to be on a panel with you and all the others. I think that, again, as Mauro said, it's not easy to follow such brilliance and many of the words that have already been spoken. I think that maybe what I'll do is I'll tap in a little bit more into the contextual piece. And also, exactly as you say, Sonja, bring out some of the new reports that we've brought forward. The first contextual piece is I really do believe, and also now wearing my chair hat of DG R&I's ESIR, which is a think tank on the social and economic implications of innovation, that we're really at the confluence of tipping points here. And therefore, the role of digitalization in the environment cannot be thought of in abstract. I just came off another panel talking about environmental taxation and said the same. We need to unpack the tensions between people, planet, and prosperity. And we really need to take this moment in time when we can tap into the consciousness of post-COVID people who are thinking about what is most essential to me. And think about how digitalization has played such a transformative role, but also that COVID within itself has been transformative and has taught us enormous amount of learnings about how we can innovate. Because we've been told time and time again, of course, right, that the green transformation is impossible. But we've just seen in the last 9 months that what we thought was impossible, both for bad or good, is actually very much possible if we put our minds to it and we think about how we can optimize our societies. So I would say within the digital space that for me, the first rule of thumb is to truly enhance the transition, is to shift from digital as the Internet of Things or the optimization of automation, and think about digitalization as the optimization of society. And therefore, you start to get to the crux of the tension between people, planet, and prosperity. You get to the crux of the issues around emissions. You get to the crux around decoupling and materials issues. And you get to the crux of the role of digitalization to service society and not just profit motives. And as you know, Svenja, I always speak with an American accent, but I am proudly European, but I grew up in California. And I can tell you that when I look at the social fabric in San Francisco, where I grew up, and how much we have, excuse my language, but truly messed up the economics of how the ICT sector has not serviced people, but has put profit above people. San Francisco now has the greatest poverty that we've seen in the United States, and yet it has the greatest wealth. So there is a real shift that has to happen if we're going to look at optimizing the environment, people, planet, and prosperity together, which takes into consideration, as you indicated, our well-being indicators, which is looking at social, environmental, and economic indicators together, and really thinking about where does digitalization fit within that? How can we optimize the way in which our systems work? So I was really surprised by the statistic that actually manufacturing was perceived as where we could get the best enhancement from digitalization. Because I tend to agree with Mauro that if you look at rural communities, the use of digitalization is fundamental and has already helped actually service small farmers in terms of their evaluation of weather patterns and understanding also crop rotation and shifts to regenerative economy. In an energy and transport sector, we of course know how we can use smart mobility, but I would say also, and coming from the work that we've been doing at different levels also with DG Research and Innovation, let's look at the role of digitalization in terms of education and transforming knowledge, because Zoom is no longer now just a tool, but it's actually a livelihood for many. It's enabled people to continue their lives. That is a totally different way in which we look at digitalization now. And also it's reduced emissions. So what I would do is plea for a real transformative thinking around how digitalization can service our societies. Where are the key impacts? How we can ensure that actually digitalization does not become a threat, both in terms of the social implications, increase in mental illness, the disenfranchisement of certain people, the bullying, which happens much more on the social media side, but truly becomes a service to the transformative change that we need. And so the last point I would just make is that means that we both need to look at the impacts without disassociating them from the positives and bring in the entrepreneurial skill of the digital community, bringing in both startups and well-established companies to think through real transformative change. My last comment will be, we have to design ourselves out of this disaster. And design is one of the key skills that the digital entrepreneurial activity has, and that we actually need to make sure that we build resilience for the forthcoming disasters, because we will have more.
Yeah. Thank you very much. There's one question that's come in from the floor that I may put to you because you touched on education. It's from Alison Morrisroe, who's from the European University Association. And she asks, should we be promoting courses that would lead to jobs in the green and digitalization transformation? Should we be doing more to promote specific these kinds of courses? Do you want to respond to that?
Yes, absolutely, I can. And we've done a lot of work with youth and education. And I think there are two things that we need to promote. First of all, we need to remember that any type of educational program has to bring in the complexities of the world we're dealing with today. So just promoting people to go into green jobs or just promoting for people to understand and learn digitalization without this consciousness shift of digitalization will service the society, I think is the wrong approach. The other thing I would say is in talking to youth, they feel totally disenfranchised. Many of them don't feel their universities are in engineering schools actually teaching them how to have the skills to deal with the challenges at hand. Many of them are dropping out of school because they don't feel that actually their professors and the knowledge base is supporting them in becoming the leaders and the workers of tomorrow. So we absolutely need to think about education as, again, really bringing forward some of this new thinking and ensuring that our youth are properly educated for the future.
There's a follow-up question, someone else, but similar topic. So I'll follow up with that right away. That's from Anda Giran-Merveille, who points out that indeed, if we ignore or we don't sufficiently address the social dimension, we will see rejection. And as Mauro also said, we risk rejection of these technologies. And then specifically, could we, for example, reorient the jobs that are being lost under COVID into more green digital jobs and skills? And who would it be that could, I guess, accompany this transformation? Who could deliver this kind of retraining?
Very good question. We just released a report, and if anybody goes onto our website, they'll see it called The Compass of How We Actually Implement the European Green Deal with Janusz Potocznik, former commissioner, and Systemic. And the Club of Rome and Systemic are working right now, actually, on what does that mean in terms of jobs for Europe. And absolutely, it spans the full spectrum of, first of all, how do we ensure that our knowledge systems, so that's universities, any other technical schools, etc., are creating the skills that we need already in terms of young people. But in addition to that, clearly we know we need to think about reskilling. We need to know about how we can actually shift the just transition so that people have more jobs. And what we're seeing actually, Svenja, is that within the compass, and now in unpacking some of the figures, if we do truly transform, we will be creating more jobs. There's one statistic that comes to mind, which I always find phenomenal, which is for each coal worker, at least in Germany, there has been an analysis that you can actually produce 8 renewables jobs. So there are a series of discussions around this, same with regenerative agriculture, where we're actually leaving automation in terms of big business agriculture into smaller holders, more hiring of people. And the last point I would make is there's a perfect example, even in the aluminum sector, which is again based on the optimization of manufacturing, where they've been able to optimize through digitalization and also to ensure that there are more robotics. But by the same token, they've been able to hire more people, and they've been able to give back to the community, not in terms of jobs only, but also in the way in which they're involved in the community. This is, for me, the perfect twinning of this green digital social example, where companies actually truly think about where they can create the win-wins and optimize their entire model, but also be green and be digital at the same time.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, that's a nice example. We too often hear robotics leads to, or people imagine leads to job losses automatically. So it's good to hear that it can indeed be the reverse. Let's move then to John Linden. So we're going to hear from one of these exciting companies that's ticking all the boxes. John joins us as CEO from Econo Solutions. As I said, he's an entrepreneur. He previously founded Procera Networks, which went from startup to going public on the New York Stock Exchange and re-IPOing on the NASDAQ. Someone with a lot of experience and everything around strategy, business development, leadership, obviously. and as well as a prolific public speaker and also an award connector of the year back in 2018. John, I'm going to hand over to you to I think introduce your company a little bit. Hopefully people have heard of it, but certainly when you told me about it, I thought it sounded great, and it picks up on many of the recommendations and suggestions we've heard this morning of what's exciting and what could really accelerate transformation going forward. So I think you have a very concrete example of this untapped potential and what is still possible looking further out into the future. So please, go ahead.
Sure. Thank you, Sonja. And thanks for having me. My name is John Linden, CEO and co-founder of Econo Solutions. And we're a Swedish startup software company that's doing what's called edge machine learning, based on 7 years of university research when we started in 2016. And basically what that means is that we make all kinds of physical things smarter. Using machine learning to make them self-learning, make them predictive, which can be used for a lot of different things. And this is kind of the key to IoT, in my opinion. I don't think that most people have really understood the true potential of IoT. It's actually huge, because it's not just a question of connecting things with sensors that are streaming data, but with IoT, we actually extend the relationship with our products to after they leave the factory, meaning that we can actually do things like monitoring the health status and creating new kinds of business models where you sell it as a service or sell SLAs and things like that. But we can also help the customer operate them in a more sustainable way. And this is one of the real key things in how we can drive a sustainable difference by actually optimizing, using the domain expertise that the product OEMs have to help the customer to operate things in a more optimal way. This is kind of like micro automation of all these different things. So we cannot do, everyone's predicting between 30, 50, or 125 billion connected devices in the next few years. And we cannot do those billions of dumb devices. They need to be smart. And automation actually spells machine learning and learning out on the device what happens. And let me give you an example, as you said, that I mentioned to you in our preparations. If you take an air conditioner, the industry has for decades been optimizing the design of the air conditioner to make it as energy efficient as possible. Of course, that's continuous work. Every component becomes better and better and more efficient. However, that doesn't really matter if you run the exact same settings on an air conditioner in Stockholm, in Kuala Lumpur, in Mumbai, or wherever you are. If it's summer or winter, if people are in the room or not, if people have different preferences. What we need to do is to optimize how every individual device, being vehicles, being machinery in manufacturing, being the air conditioner, to run optimally for where it is being used, for the purpose it's being used. And this is really, the technology is really available now. It's actually pretty straightforward and simple. With those two things that I mentioned before, connectivity and machine learning, we can do that. We can make them self-learning. And we can also, by seeing the health status and continuously monitoring the health status, see that something needs attention, something needs maintenance, which is a good way to also extend the life length of these products. Because by proactively managing them before they actually have a fatal breakdown, you can extend the life length of these products. So there are so many things that we can do to actually accelerate the shift over to a more sustainable use of each and every individual thing. It's ranging from industrial to consumer IoT. That is just tremendous, which is why we talk about this as the next big sustainability leap.
And do you also see equal potential across all sectors of the economy? I'm thinking back to that first question we had, or are there certain sectors you would highlight as either having more potential or being more, I guess, interesting from a business case perspective?
I think there are two perspectives on that. The answer, I totally agree with, like Casper said, all of the above, no doubt about it. But what we have seen is that if I'm being a bit pragmatic, that you need to have a more data-driven approach to things. And reality is that some industries are further along than others, like in industrial, in manufacturing, and in automotive, they are further along in this adoption of a data-driven approach than in some other verticals. So that is one force that is impacting the ability to actually make this change. First, you have to take that position and then drive that change. practically, if you look at the technology, if you look at the physical opportunity and the theoretical opportunity, it's equal for all these different industries. And we will see there's no industry that will pass without being totally changed and redefined. And if they don't do it themselves, then someone will come in from the side and do it for them. So all of these industries will definitely be impacted.
Okay. And what would you say, so you're a startup, we tend to associate, yes. I don't know how, Europe is not often described as the premier place in the world for startups. We tend to hear a lot about Silicon Valley and so forth. You're here, that's great. What would you say is the main challenge you face to, I guess, taking your business model further? Is there an ecosystem here that enables you to plug into all these sectors to start trying to unlock some of these opportunities out there?
There is, and more could be done. There can always be more done. As an entrepreneur, I tend to focus on kind of the opportunities rather than the challenges. Going back to like the Formula One reference, we today have Formula E. You miss some of the noise and the sound and that kind of action that comes with that. On the other hand, you get benefits like the fact that you can drive these races in downtown Berlin or Paris or Bern, which is awesome for the audience. So every change comes with an opportunity. So I think it's important to focus on what are kind of the strengths, the benefits, the opportunities, especially when we compare to the United States, where I have a lot of experience of working myself, and Asia. They're different. But let's focus on Europe. I see one thing that is extremely a huge opportunity for us, and that is the fact that we have a long-term, big industrial industry here in Europe. We have customers like ABB, Volvo, Siemens Energy, Alfa Laval, these big corporations. I'm a big believer in startup enterprise collaboration, because startups can be very agile, we can be fast, we can take a lot of risk because we don't fall that far if we fail. The corporates are typically not that fast moving due to different reasons, but the corporates have reach. So the combination between us being agile and very fast moving in developing new technology and the corporations bringing it to market, that is the perfect combination. And Europe has all the circumstances or conditions for doing this at scale. So if we can do that combination, and I think that is a question of two things. It's a question of attitude, both in terms of attitude towards enterprise startup collaboration, but also a change in attitude in how we look at things, like what I talked about before. Make it cool to use something refurbished, make it cool to extend the life of a product rather than wear and tear and buy something new, and give incentives for this kind of collaboration, give incentives for this kind of attitudinal change. So we can get that difference. Those are things that I definitely think that we can see. So I'm probably not the right person to answer the questions about the hurdles and challenges, but I do see a lot of benefits and opportunities with being a European company.
Yeah, thank you. No, that's interesting what you say. Also, the fact that we have these old, these industries that have existed for a long time that are sometimes portrayed as old-fashioned, and why do we need them? And as you say, that they can actually provide a great partner for a startup, because they provide, as you say, you have the agility, they provide the reach. So seeing them as an opportunity too, I think is a very useful, certainly constructive perspective going forward. What I wanted to do is, we've had a few questions come in, and I would say to all of you on the panel, if you want to take the floor at some point, then stick up your hand, and I will make sure I give it to you. We had two more polling questions to put to everyone watching, and what I propose is that we put both of those to you now, and then we can see the answers again a few moments from now. So one of them is, what is the main barrier, do you think, to accelerating the twin transition? And you've got a number of options there, ranging from the financial side to regulation, skills, and so forth. And the second one is, where do you see the greatest opportunity to move both digital and climate environmental action forward? And there you've got a longer list of options covering everything from climate, biodiversity strategy, industrial strategy. I should say these are specific initiatives at the European level. The EU taxonomy regulation, sustainable finance is another one. You've got a long list, and I know it's difficult to choose one. And And I understand everyone would like to say all of the above, but we're trying just to see if you had to pick one, where do you see the greatest potential in this year, so for near-term action? So if everyone would like to answer those two questions, then I think in the meantime we can carry on with the panel, and we'll come to those answers in just a moment. And I wanted to pick up on, I guess, to take both to John and to Casper the point that Mauro made about making people feel safe, and the fact that people, we see it indeed with the vaccination debate at the moment. And John, maybe start with you, when you were speaking about making every single device smarter, I started to think, are people going to like that? Your device is suddenly no longer 100% your device. It's actually still a little bit someone else's device, and that someone else may decide to do things with your device that you perhaps don't know about or wouldn't appreciate. So maybe you first, and then Casper, something on how are we making people feel safe?
Sure. No, absolutely right. And we see this more and more becoming a big question. We talk about the integrity question when it comes to data. That's what we focus upon. And when you develop smart features, that's actually one of the reasons that speaks in favor of what we do, edge machine learning, putting the intelligence on the device. If you think like we work with Husqvarna, I have my Automower at home running around my garden, knows absolutely everything based on sensors about what's happening, if I'm home or not, and so forth. And just like I don't post on Facebook if I'm going away on vacation, leave my home empty. I don't want my RoboMower to post to the vendor or anyone else who can intercept that information and steal that data that I'm going to be away. So that's a very important thing. By actually adding the intelligence to the edge on the device, it doesn't have to leave the premises. So that's one big reason for why you want to make some of these decisions at the edge without any manual intervention, without sending it to a cloud service where someone else can intercept it or steal it. There are, however, a lot of things that you expect and want from your vendor, and that list is growing every day. So the things that are crucial for Husqvarna to deliver a good functioning service to mow my lawn, that is something I want to send to the cloud, to the Husqvarna cloud, where they can process it. But they should have the insights. They don't need to know everything. They don't need to get all that sensitive real-time sensor data. They should get the insights that can help them to deliver on the service that I'm buying from them. I think this is very important for everyone to consider. Don't get greedy when it comes to data, but think about what you need, because it comes with the big responsibility of handling someone else's data. And I think that we should, I'm all for GDPR, more the better when it comes to actually legislating about who owns the data, and that you can feel safe if you actually spend the time to understand it, that you can feel safe about who owns the data, where is it being stored, and how can I control if I want to get rid of it, and so forth. Absolutely. Yeah. It's very crucial for that feeling of feeling safe.
Okay, great. Thank you. That's a good answer. Casper, the same question to you. And on the back of that, since Mauro raised the point about ultimately we need to not just mitigate, but eliminate emissions, that's maybe a good moment too to bring in Microsoft's work on actually going carbon negative out to 2030 and beyond. Go ahead.
No, thanks very much. I feel like a little bit in the mood of being polemic. So if you excuse me, I'll respond to a couple of the points from other panelists to begin with. I think, one should never disagree with the European Commission. And in fact, I don't think we do disagree a lot, Mauro. But I will say a couple of points going back to your intervention at the beginning. I think, first of all, in my view, the biggest change agent is regulation. And I think that also applies in the sustainability area. I think there is this misunderstanding that Europe, out of altruism, grew a sustainable sector, a lot of green jobs, a lot of new industries, when in fact, a lot of these industries came because of heavy regulation limiting, traditional industries across Europe. So when I look at the work that Mauro, with a lot of other colleagues in the European Commission, is doing, we actually counted the number of regulations coming out of the Green Deal. And you'll tell me if I'm wrong, but we came to the number 25, which means that for all companies, including Microsoft, over the next couple of years, we will be hit by an avalanche of new requirements. And we welcome that, because I think this is about accountability, it's about transparency, it's about reporting, and it's about making sure that we all contribute to this. I think, Mauro, you said one thing about the necessity of having trust. And I think that's very much our motto, that technology runs on trust. if people don't trust putting data into the cloud, this transition will not happen, and that will not benefit innovation, but it will certainly not benefit sustainability either. The only thing I would add is that it is not more safe to have a server in your basement than it is to going into the cloud. Some of the most vicious cybersecurity attacks we've seen over the last couple of years have in fact hit, companies or government agencies that were running on technology that was not state of the art. So I think we have to be careful making a contradiction there. What I would agree on is that we have an enormous responsibility also as a technology company to make sure that we have state of the art privacy, that we protect information also from an IP point of view. And one of the differences between our business model and other business models is that we don't have access to our customers' data. We don't use that data. We don't compete with our customers. We provide what I would call sort of the enabling critical infrastructure to do that. And then to Sandrine, good to see you again. I think, statistics are wonderful, and I don't disagree with anything you said. The only thing I would just add is that, if you are the coal miner in Germany that are losing your job, for you as an individual, it might not be fantastic to be thrown statistics saying your job will be lost, but we will create 8 renewable jobs in other areas. And that leads me to a point that many of you have actually also raised, and that is the necessity to have an inclusive sustainability transition. I think what Commissioner Timmermans is very often referring to as just transition. And I think actually this is one of the areas where we have to invest a lot more, because if people don't trust the technology we develop, and if they don't trust that a greening the economy or greening technology does not mean that we have a contraction of the economy or that people will lose their jobs, I do not think we're going to be successful with the green transition. And this is one of the areas where I see a lot of potential also for a renewed transatlantic partnership, because whether you sit in Europe, Minister Schulze made that clear as well, you have a particular responsibility for your constituencies to make sure that you bring them along in the bus. If we were sitting in President Biden's administration, I'm pretty sure that they are extremely focused on making sure that the broader US population will gradually become more supportive of action around climate change and sustainability. And I think that requires us to be particularly focused on making sure that everybody will be on board in the bus. Now, very quickly at the end, I think this dual responsibility is what is going to fix the massive challenges we have ahead of us. The public sector will lay the foundation, the guardrails, the regulation coming forward that will be necessary, but we also think the private sector will have to do its part. So we have established in Microsoft some pretty ambitious targets, becoming carbon negative in 2030, becoming zero waste in 2030, also becoming water positive in 2030 as well. But the big moonshot for us is by 2050, we want to remove all historical carbon emissions going all the way back to 1975 when Microsoft was established. And I want to be honest here today, we don't have the technology today that will enable us to fulfill that target. And that requires us to invest. We have a climate innovation fund that is investing in technology that is either not existing today or is not scalable today. That will be important for us to deliver on our own goals. But I think that the major role that a company like Microsoft can play is to bring along our supply chain, our customers, so that our greening and sustainability targets will gradually have a spin-off effect on all, the thousands of companies we're working with, including in Europe. And I think it's that public-private partnership that will ultimately lead to change.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for that. Sandrine, I just wanted to ask Mauro and maybe Svenja too, if they want to come back. I should say we had the results of the polls as well, so I'll just tell you those. In terms of challenges, indeed, regulation, red tape and incoherent framework was the subline to that. But regulation, with a quarter of people, 26% saying they see that as the main challenge going forward. So supporting a little bit well, Kasper, you said you welcome it, but nonetheless, I guess there's a need to get it right, is what participants are saying. Less important, fragmented market, 17%. Lack of investments, other financial incentives, just 7%. So there is a feeling that the money is there. It's we need the regulation to make sure it's appropriately spent. And also fewer people believe seeing a problem with inertia. Hold on, fragmented market. Inertia resistance, oh no, that came out with almost a third of people, indeed. Sorry, it's skills, just 4% see a skills problem, so okay. But inertia resistance from established businesses, a third of people picked that actually. So that's actually the number one, regulation second with a quarter of people. Maybe that's something for the panelists to pick up on as well. I won't go into the responses on where you see the biggest opportunities yet, but just so you know, that's on the obstacle front. Mauro, you first, and then maybe the minister, and then Svenja, I'll come to you. Yeah. Go ahead.
Sure, thank you. Two quick points. One on regulation, one on jobs and skills. On regulation, people who don't know Europe think that we are regulation mad. People who know Europe, and Kaspar just given a demonstration, know how Europe regulate. The greatest strength of the internal market has been that we don't regulate how things get done. We regulate what we want done and what we don't want done. And then we throw it back to society, back to the private sector, back to industry to figure out how. And that doesn't only constrain people, but often opportunities. And this is not a slogan. For the hard economy, the brick and mortar, the industrial economy, that's what we've done for the past 40 years, perhaps, and it works brilliantly. That's how we build the internal market. Mm-hmm. Translating that into the service economy, into the digital economy, isn't automatic. It's not a mechanical operation. It's a lot more complicated, but that has to remain the objective. If we are forced to regulate how things get done, we will. But that, I think, is a systemic failure and something that should be corrected at some point. Our system was conceived in terms of opening spaces, but framing those spaces in terms of what our society wants. And I think that is the right way to do it, and it works. It gets more complicated. The green and digital transformation are going to make this a lot more complicated than it was. And people talk about the taxonomy. Taxonomy is a brilliant example of how we're trying to tame the complexity. And honestly, can I say it's a brilliant job? No, it isn't. Can I say it's the only job of this kind ever attempted and it works? Yes. So, it will be improved, and it will take a long time, but it's there and it works. So it is possible, but it's very, very hard to do it in the 21st century than it was in the 20th century, when we were dealing with the 19th century economy. And we haven't finished dealing with that. Second, job and skills. Interesting, that poll. I'm prepared to take a bet that in 2-3 years' time, you make the same poll and you get the opposite result. Because inertia has been a problem. Svenja mentioned earlier on, which was saying, the climate policy was a bit of a backwater until not long ago. Now it's changed. Things are changing. When I arrived in this job, less than 3 years ago, I thought it was a nice, quiet backwater for my last job of my career. Interesting, fascinating, not a lot of hard work. Boy, I was wrong. So it's changing very fast, but it hasn't penetrated people's consciousness. And also, I'm speaking for Europe here, but I suspect you get the same phenomenon elsewhere. The divide is not between sectors, is within sectors. In every industrial sector, in every economic sector, you have top-of-the-class company, highly competitive, highly conscious of their responsibility, putting money, effort, skills, intelligence into change, and you have people who live from one day to the other, and for whom change is a life threat to their business. and you have them next to each other in the same country, in the same region, in the same sector. That is the real challenge that we have on inertia. But it's moving. Skills, it's appearing, and it's the point that Kasper made. We're not going to be able to reconvert all miners. It's also a question of age. But a miner today isn't a guy with a pickaxe. A miner today is a technician, an engineer, is a person with skills. Well, skilled people can acquire different skills. Not all of them, not at every stage in their life. At some point, you may be able to, but you don't want any longer. So there is an issue of that kind. But it's not as if everybody who has a job who is bound to disappear in the green transformation can't have another job. And skills is something you will see a lot more from the Commission in terms of the blueprint for skills agenda, and how we reconvert this to looking at what are the jobs of the future. So far in industrial restructuring, we've looked at the jobs we were losing, and how can we find these people another job, any other job? That doesn't work anymore. We are now back at finding the same people another job 10 years later. We have to look at what job can we give people that they can keep until the end of their career, ideally. Again, very difficult, but not impossible. It's not rocket science. It can be done.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Very interesting what you said. So indeed, the results we had today on the biggest barrier, so 32% inertia, 26% say regulation, and just 4% the very lowest say skills. You say certainly the skills and inertia, it's something we could see reversed a couple of years from now. So it simply hasn't got through to people yet, just how enormous this transformation is and what kind of impact it will have. I'll just share with you the results to the other poll and then move to Svenja. So there was a spread of answers there, but the biggest opportunity for an acceleration of the twin transition, people see in the circular economy action plan, with 26% picking that. And following that, the next three most popular answers, each of them with 16%, was the climate law and implementation of the new 2030 climate framework, transport, sustainable and smart mobility strategy, and the Data Act and development of data spaces. Answers for the rest were spread out. There were a few options that got 0. So AI was one of them, AI regulation, and biodiversity was the other one, where nobody picked that as the biggest, maybe because they feel we're well on track to that. Svenja, over to you for a comment, if you like.
Yeah, I would like to give you two examples why regulation is so important to bring up innovations. We see that in Germany. Germany is really, really good with our companies in all these green tech markets, all about waste and water management, about filters, something like that. There we have a lot of small and medium-sized companies who are very good all over the world. So why we have all these companies? Because of a long tradition of regulation in these fields. So that pushes innovation over the last 30 years, and now we see the benefits. And I think the same is with the Circular Economy Action Plan. Everybody knows we have to establish a circular economy. That's what we need in the future. But how we get this circular economy? And we have a concrete example now on the European level. We need digital twins from all our products. Digital twins, digital product passport, who says where this product come from, how to recycle it, how to repair it. And now the Commission started the first legislation on that. It's a battery regulation for electric cars, and all the batteries from the electric cars need now a digital passport, and that is the prerequisite for a circular economy, and that is only thinkable, it's possible because of digitalization, because of the management of a lot of data. That is possible today, and such such innovations are not driven by the market, because the market alone can't do all these things you need for that. And so the state, the government, the European Commission is very important to drive such things forward. So I absolutely agree. Regulation is one of the important points.
Okay, thank you very much. Maybe one follow-up on the back of that, this idea of, we've also touched on the just transition, and Germany came up as an example. Do you think we're, I guess, paying enough attention to the ability also of digital technologies to foster a just transition, as well as simply, or just, alongside environmental protection?
I think Franz Timmermans is absolutely right. We have a just transition, or we have just no transition. Because if you don't bring the people, all the ones who in the societies with us, you get results as we see in the US the last years. So we need to take the people with us. Without that, it doesn't work. So just on a regional level, not on the level of sophisticated, on a high level, but in the region where the coal miners are, we have that example before, you need to say, what is the perspective of the people in this region, what jobs we will create, what is the next, what their children will do after the coal mining is phased out. So that is not a question that not only in Berlin and in the main in the capital here, but it is a question for the region, and the government has to take the money and the competencies to develop solutions in the regions who are affected. And it's the same for the car industry. They have to change in a very hard way, because they have digitalization and reducing CO2 at the same time. And it is really hard. A lot of people have fear that they will lose their job, and to give the trust that we will handle this transition and that there will be jobs in the future, and that with the qualifications the workers have, that they still get a future in their region. That is really important, and that's the challenge for every government.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Sandrine, I was going to come to you. We're in our last 5 minutes, I should add. So I have indeed a question for Sandrine. I saw you answered it in writing, but maybe orally you want to just answer it briefly. And I've got a question for John after that as well. So Sandrine, feel free to comment. And the question was around the EU taxonomy, sustainable finance, and including, are digital technologies sufficiently included, optimally included in that? Go ahead.
Okay, so I'll go quickly on that, but I had so many other thoughts on the other discussion. But to go quickly on the taxonomy. Yes, ICT industry is included. It's definitely a soft touch. The fact is, we have to remember that we were looking at substantial contribution of mitigating activities, and we focused on those sectors that had the greatest impact. And digitalization has an impact on emissions, both reductions and increases, but not a substantial contribution in terms of negative impact. So we have to think that, yes, we did address, but not as much as we could. And I'd like to bring in the materials use aspect of this, also with regard to green technologies and the fact that the taxonomy, and I was in charge of manufacturing, we felt we were not capable of going through the full breadth of the impact of materials use, both metals and rare earths. And this still needs to be done, and it's on the table. Coming back to the just transition, I think the minister was so right when she said, and this was a bit of an answer to Casper's rebuttal, and you're absolutely right, Casper. We can't just go to people with a statistic and say, oh, we can create 8 jobs for your 1 job. What we need to do, and most of them, by the way, coal workers are not saying they want to continue in coal. What they want is they want to stay within their communities. And so this is a question of, we talk about smart technology. I'd like to say smart policy making and smart direction from leaders, which takes emotional and also intellectual intelligence, which is, we know that what people want is for us to build communities. They want jobs, but they also want an income, which means we may need to think about universal basic income, not just a job. We may need to think about different taxation structures. We may need to think about new industrial types of zones rather than the existing zones. That's what the just transition is all about. And the last point that I would make is on regulation. Fully agree that we have the capacity here in Europe to really develop the innovation wave that we need and revolutionize it. But we do need to simplify our regulation. I mean, time and time again, we are compared to other regions where there's less bureaucracy, less red tape, and therefore real innovation and entrepreneurial activity is allowed to thrive. So we need to find that balance between smart innovation through regulation and smart innovation through market factors.
Okay, thank you. And John, the final question is for you then, before, I know we could keep on going, but we're going to have to close after this. And it's a question from Peter Paul Lannen from Hewlett Packard Enterprise. Can your concept, the Econo concept, be applied to data centers?
Absolutely. However, I mean, we have on purpose leveraged our benefits, the fact that we can scale down to very small devices and still do incremental learning. So we've designed it to kind of plug in with the products that Casper and Microsoft and AWS and the likes provide. So our focus is on running at the edge.
Okay, so your focus is to complement the activity around data centers and so on.
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, we're at 11:40. I feel we could keep going. It's been really interesting. So I want to thank all of you very much for your time, for your contributions, for the thought-provoking responses. Thank you to everyone who's been watching us and for the questions that came in as well. It's been great to be here. And that leaves me to say, everyone who's staying, we've got a 15-minute coffee break. And during that time, we'd encourage you to go to the exhibition booths, and both Microsoft and Hewlett Packard Enterprise will be going live in these next 15 minutes. So you have something you can visit there. And the next session then will restart at 11:55. So we look forward to seeing you again then. Thank you. A big round of applause virtually to all of our panelists. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
See you soon.